If you go to Nandi County, you will notice that some of the places have names of Maasai origin. For example, there is Olesos, which simply is Maasai for son of Lesos. You will also find a place the Kalenjin call Ndulele. Ndulele means a poisonous fruit in Maasai language. And did you know that Eldoret is Maasai for a stony riverbed or a swampy place? And that Sirikwa is actually the subtribe of the Maasai? This is because many years ago, the Maasai warriors, the Morans, would fight over and over again with the Kalenjin warriors, the Muranikap Luget. When this happened, the Maasai would take women and goats and cows and land from the Kalenjin community and make it their own. Oh, the Maasai Marans were feared for their prowess with the spear and their hostility. And the red ochre they painted on themselves struck fear in the hearts of their opponents. In one Kalenjin village lived a woman with her 2 sons. She was a widow and she was poor. So poor that her name reflected her low status in the community. The villagers called her Tapanan, meaning poor, unwanted, an outcast. Since her husband had passed away, she had struggled to bring her 2 sons single-handedly. She didn't have anywhere to farm, and she would go to her neighbors' farms after harvest season and collect anything that might have been left behind. Many of her neighbors, her fellow villagers, did not treat Tapanan and her children very kindly. Even when parties were held in the village, she was sure that she and her sons would not receive an invitation. And she would just have to comfort herself with swallowing saliva, while the others ate roast meats, drank milk and blood, and made merry. And even when Kipsunde, the big celebration of a harvest season, was done, the villagers would just give her leftovers. After all, they said, what contribution had she and her 2 sons made towards a successful harvest? Well, time waits for no man, and as the years went on and on, her 2 sons grew up, and they soon underwent tumdo, the initiation rituals that every young man in the Kalenjin community have to undergo. And soon, their friends, their age mates, were celebrating. For music and cows and goats and other things that were part of Koito, the bride price could be seen moving from the young men's houses to those of the young women that they had chosen as wives. And soon, their age mates were celebrating the births of their children. A boy here, a girl there, twins over there. But still, Tapanan's sons remained wifeless. For which young woman would dare disgrace her family by telling them that no cows or goats would make their way to her home because she had chosen to marry a pauper? And which parents would stoop so low as to give their young woman to be married to a pauper, someone who could not even manage to feed themselves? I mean, was that not sentencing their own grandchildren to a life of misery, a life of shame, a life of ridicule? Tapanan walked around with a heavy heart. She felt guilty that her sons should bear the shameful label of Kipsongoyat, unmarried, because she, their only surviving parent, could not provide dowry for them to acquire wives. Was she meant to die without feeling the warmth of holding a grandchild to her bosom? And every now and then, she would go down to the Murkosi River, the river that separated the Maasai from the Kalenjin, and she would sit there, if only to get some peace, some relaxation for just a few minutes. And one day, as usual, she went down to the Murkosi, and as she sat there, her eyes crossed over to the other side, and she saw a scene that she had seen so many times before. From high up, the herds of cattle were coming down to the river to drink water, chaperoned by the brightly colored, brightly decorated Maasai Morans. But on this day, it was as if a curtain had been drawn from her eyes, and she saw this in a new light. Cows, healthy, well-fed cows. That is exactly what her sons needed to have wives. That is what she needed to turn her life around. And for several weeks after this, Tapanan observed from her vantage position. And soon, a plan began forming in her mind. And she began accompanying other Kalenjin women as they went for their trade journeys with the Maasai, helping a neighbor here and a neighbor here. But her eyes observed things that she had seen so many times but had not given attention. The way the women walked around, doing their daily activities. The children taking care of the calves and playing around. The clustering of the manyatas. How dense the plants and the forests were around there. And different paths coming from the Maasai villages. For she knew that all this was key to the plan that she was brewing. And when she felt that her plan was solid enough, she called her sons to her heart.
Yes, Gorga. Misinga.
Boy.
Boy.
Chigi go bata yeta bo mangundunda. Amma ki gere gengai. Tos mi gino gere.
Achis.
Yeta ko sirta baba nango ogi ge amnyale.
My sons, it has been 7 years. 7 years since you were initiated. And here you stand in front of me, unmarried. And here I sit with no grandchild to cradle in my arms and no one to send for firewood. Her eldest son shifted nervously on his feet. Mother, you know we are working as hard as we can to get dowry so that we can be able to have wives. Please, Mother, give us time, and God permitting, we will soon give you daughters-in-law and grandchildren, he said. But the younger son was feeling a bit impatient. Mother, you know the only thing this world understands is wealth. We have seen how they look at us. Huh? But what can we do? We cannot go and raid the Maasai now, can we? His elder brother smiled. The mother had just laid a trap, and the younger brother had fallen into it. Hiding her own smile, Tapanan began explaining to the sons about the plan that she had formulated. And the two sons were amazed at just how much detail their mother had put into consideration. The very next day, the two young men went out and whispered to the few young men who had made friends with them despite their poverty. And the plan continued fermenting. Several days later, Tapanan walked down towards the Murkusi. She was nervous, her heart was pounding, for she knew that this plan, this mission was a life or death situation, nothing in between. She waded through the Murkusi River, heading towards one of the Maasai villages. And when she got to the other side, she looked around to make sure that nobody was seeing her. And then, quickly, she removed her clothes and only remained with her inner garment, her chepkawiyet. And then opened the small bag she had carried with her. And from the bag, she removed cowbells that she tied to her arms and to her legs. And then she took some grass, tied it to her waist, and began walking, heading towards the Maasai village. And as she walked, the cowbells jingled with every step. And as she walked, yes, people could hear her arrival. She soon came to the Maasai village. First, it was the children who noticed her, and they began pointing at her, giggling and following her around. And soon, their mothers and other women who were walking outside came out to see what was causing all this excitement. And they too were embarrassed to see a mad woman with children on her heels. But when she broke out in dance, singing unintelligibly at the top of her voice, oh, even they could not hold their giggles and their laughter. And soon, a big crowd was gathered around Tapanan, laughing at her antics. Up in the grazing fields, the Morans heard the jingling of the bells, and they began wondering what was going on. But when the shrieking of the villagers was carried far and wide by the wind, oh, they knew exactly what had to be done. Leaving their cows, they charged down towards the village, spears at the ready. And when they saw a crowd gathered, they knew that indeed something was happening. Oh, and they ran towards the crowd, only to stop at first, then double over, oh, holding their ribs in laughter as they saw the mad woman doing this and that and doing this and that. High up in the fields, Tapanan's sons and their few friends had waited near where the cows were being grazed. And when they saw the warriors take off towards the village, they had come out of their hiding places, their bows and arrows ready, and they had huddled the cattle together and began driving them away high into the hills. Down at the village, the Morans soon heard the lowing of the cows and the jingling of the cowbells from high up in their grazing fields, and they realized that there could be a real raid happening now. Oh, and they left the crowd and charged back towards the grazing fields. The women, looking around and seeing that this time there was actually danger, began running this way and that way, calling to their children, a big commotion as they ran to hide. And in this commotion, Tapanan took advantage of that to remove the bells from her arms and her ankles, and using one of the paths she had seen, sneaked away from the village and headed towards Kalenjin land. When the Maasai warriors reached the grazing fields, they realized that indeed their cows had been stolen, but they could still hear the bells from the cows and the lowing of the cows, and they decided to follow them up. But Tapanan's sons and their friends were ready, for as soon as the Maasai Morans approached the foot of the hill, They unleashed their bows and arrows and rained arrows on them, forcing the Morans to run and hide and duck for cover. And since they had absolutely no idea how big an army was waiting for them, the Morans decided not to follow the cows, lest they be ambushed by a better prepared army. You can imagine the shock on the villagers' faces when they saw Tapanan leading a huge herd of cows, accompanied by her sons and their few friends. And with all these cattle in her possession, she became the richest person in the entire region. And this earned her a lot of respect as the village's heroine, for she had done what no other warrior would ever have imagined to do. Well, even with her wealth, Tapanan did not treat the villagers the way they had treated her and her sons. Instead, she threw a big party and invited everybody to come and celebrate with her. And this earned her even more respect. The Kalenjin Council of Elders were shocked by her critical thinking and her planning, and they invited her to be one of their strategic advisors. And with her help, the group would later come up with military tactics that allowed them to capture back their land from the Maasai. And her sons, the ones who had been disrespected and unrecognized, they married the most beautiful ladies of the land, and they gave her so many grandchildren. And Tapanan's name changed too, for she was no longer called Tapanan, the poor, the outcast, but she now became TAPKENDI. Yes, TAPKENDI, meaning she who leads. Her sons would later form the Bororiet, the clan known as CHAPA. And to this day, they are known as the men of CHAPA. So they say.